For more than 40 years, the United States government believed one man controlled the money behind American organized crime. They followed him across states, across borders, across decades. They listened to his phone calls. They read his mail. They mapped his relationships. They never proved it. He was never convicted of a major crime. He never ruled openly. He never built a visible empire. And when he died, there was no fortune waiting to be discovered, only unanswered questions. This story is not about violence. It is about how power learned to disappear. His name was Meyer Lansky. By the end of this story, one question will remain unresolved: how a man suspected of shaping modern organized crime outlived every investigation, yet left almost nothing behind, not because he failed, but because he succeeded too quietly. Meyer Lansky did not begin with ambition. He began with observation. Born in Grodno, then part of the Russian Empire, he entered the world at a moment when survival depended on awareness. His family fled instability and violence, arriving in New York City in 1911. They settled on the Lower East Side. It was not a place that welcomed newcomers. It tolerated them. The Lower East Side was crowded, noisy, and unforgiving. Immigrant families packed into small apartments. Work was scarce. Money was temporary. Territory belonged to those who could defend it. Irish gangs controlled blocks. Italian groups were organizing. Jewish gangs existed in between, fragmented, unprotected, often overlooked. Violence was common, but violence came with consequences. Young Meyer Lansky noticed something early. The loudest men attracted the most attention, and attention brought the police. He learned to stay quiet. While other boys fought for reputation, Lansky watched. He listened to conversations. He observed patterns. He learned English quickly. He learned arithmetic even faster, and most importantly, he learned restraint. At this moment, he still had a choice. Gambling became his entry point, not because it was exciting, but because it was predictable. Dice games, card games, small bets exchanged in back rooms and hallways. Lansky studied who won and who lost, who cheated, who always returned. He understood something fundamental. People do not gamble to win. They gamble to believe, and belief is predictable. This understanding separated him from the men around him. Where others relied on intimidation, Lansky relied on probability. Where others enforced with fists, he enforced with mathematics. And no one noticed the cost yet. In his teenage years, Meyer Lansky met Benjamin Siegel. Siegel, later known as Bugsy, was everything Lansky was not: charismatic, impulsive, violent. Together, they formed an unlikely partnership. Siegel enforced, Lansky calculated. It was a division of labor that would quietly reshape organized crime. Prohibition changed everything. Alcohol became illegal. Demand became constant. Most gangs responded with force. They fought over territory. They killed rivals. They attracted attention. Lansky chose a different approach: infrastructure. He did not smuggle bottles himself. He did not run guns. He did not manage crews. He invested. Supply routes, distribution chains, risk assessment. When raids happened, others were arrested. When violence erupted, others were named. Lansky remained peripheral, not invisible, but unprovable. This period taught him a lasting lesson. Crime does not fail because it is illegal. It fails because it is disorganized, and disorganization invites scrutiny. By the 1920s, organized crime in America faced a problem. There were too many gangs, too many wars, too much attention. Violence was no longer profitable. Lansky believed crime needed structure.
This belief aligned him with a rising Italian gangster, Charles "Lucky" Luciano. Luciano understood organization. Lansky understood finance. Together, they supported a new idea: cooperation instead of conflict. In 1929, major crime figures gathered in Atlantic City. The meeting was informal, but its implications were permanent. Crime leaders discussed coordination, not conquest, territory, profit sharing, dispute resolution. This was not a declaration of war. It was a business meeting, and Meyer Lansky was there, listening. At the time, this arrangement seemed efficient. What it actually created was insulation. Violence decreased. Attention shifted elsewhere. Crime began to resemble administration, and administration is harder to prosecute. When Prohibition ended, many criminals collapsed. Their income disappeared. Their skills did not transfer. Lansky adapted immediately. He shifted to gambling, legal where possible, illegal where necessary, controlled everywhere. Florida became a testing ground: loose regulation, seasonal wealth, political corruption. Gambling flourished, but Lansky was already looking beyond American borders. Cuba. In Havana, Lansky saw alignment: a government eager for revenue, a tourism industry hungry for spectacle, and jurisdiction beyond immediate American reach. Casinos were built carefully, not chaotic, not violent, organized. Money flowed steadily, not from desperation, from leisure. This distinction mattered. Gambling in Cuba did not look criminal. It looked legitimate. Behind the scenes, Lansky refined techniques: offshore accounts, shell companies, layered ownership structures. Money moved across borders faster than law enforcement could follow. This was not improvisation, it was design. American authorities suspected enormous hidden wealth. Some estimates reached hundreds of millions, but estimates are not evidence, and evidence never arrived. Money moved through structures designed to erase responsibility, which meant no one could point to a single man, and without a man, there was no crime to prove. Lansky lived modestly: no lavish estates, no public displays. This was not humility, it was insulation. One decision Lansky would make later in his life would protect him for decades and quietly ensure he could never return to the world he built. At the time, it appeared cautious. In reality, it was irreversible. Unlike his peers, Lansky avoided unnecessary violence, not out of morality, but out of efficiency. Violence disrupts systems. Noise attracts attention, and attention creates risk. When Bugsy Siegel was murdered in 1947, speculation followed immediately. Did Lansky approve it? There is no proof, no recorded order, no witness testimony, only implication. And implication was something Lansky understood better than anyone. By the late 1940s, his reputation was established, not as a boss, but as a financier, the man behind the numbers. But systems once built do not require loyalty. They require maintenance, and history was about to test whether calculation could survive politics. What Meyer Lansky had built did not look like power. That was the mistake, because what followed would change how crime operated without ever looking like crime again.
By the early 1930s, American organized crime was at a crossroads. Prohibition had created enormous wealth, but it had also created instability. Too many gangs, too many rivalries, too much blood. Violence had become expensive, and expense attracts attention. Meyer Lansky understood this with clarity. Crime, he believed, did not need more power. It needed restraint. The era of neighborhood dominance was ending. In its place, something quieter was forming: a system, not ruled by fear, but by agreement. This transformation did not happen overnight. It emerged from exhaustion. Gang wars had drawn police pressure. Assassinations had disrupted profits. The underworld began to recognize a truth it had long ignored. Chaos was bad for business. Lansky's role in this moment was subtle but decisive. He was not a public leader. He did not command crews. He advised. He calculated. He showed men how much violence truly cost. His closest collaborator in this shift was Charles "Lucky" Luciano. Luciano understood hierarchy. Lansky understood finance. Together, they supported a radical idea: crime without ethnicity. For decades, criminal groups had divided along ethnic lines: Irish, Italian, Jewish. Each protected its own territory. Lansky believed this division was inefficient. Profit did not require loyalty. It required cooperation. The National Crime Syndicate was not a single organization. It was an understanding, an agreement among rivals to stop fighting and start sharing. Territory would be respected. Disputes would be mediated. Violence would be controlled. This was not morality. It was strategy. Meetings replaced shootouts. Negotiation replaced retaliation. Crime began to resemble administration, and administration is difficult to prosecute. Lansky's influence during this period grew rapidly, not because he demanded authority, but because others relied on his calculations. He knew which ventures would survive scrutiny, which would fail, which would invite attention. Gambling became the foundation. It was steady, predictable, and scalable. Unlike bootlegging, it did not depend on a single law. It depended on demand, and demand never disappeared. Lansky expanded gambling operations across New York, Florida, and New Orleans. Some were legal, some were tolerated, some were illegal. The distinction mattered less than control. Florida became a critical testing ground. Seasonal wealth, tourism, loose enforcement. Money moved quietly, and quietly meant safely. But Lansky's most ambitious expansion lay beyond American borders. Cuba. Havana offered what the United States increasingly could not: distance, political cooperation, and limited oversight. Under the Batista government, gambling was encouraged. Casinos were framed as economic development. Tourism increased. Revenue flowed. Lansky recognized the opportunity immediately. Casinos in Havana were not built as criminal dens. They were designed as institutions: professional staff, clear accounting, predictable margins. Gambling did not look illicit. It looked legitimate. Behind the scenes, Lansky refined financial insulation: offshore banking, shell corporations, layered ownership. Money traveled faster than law enforcement, and responsibility dissolved along the way. American authorities suspected massive hidden wealth. They believed Lansky controlled fortunes beyond measure. But belief is not proof, and proof never arrived. The system worked precisely because it erased fingerprints. No single transaction led back to a single man, and without a man, there was no case. This success created tension. Inside organized crime, resentment grew. Some believed Lansky held influence without accountability. Others believed he was protected. Neither belief could be proven. The most visible test of Lansky's system came in Las Vegas, a city still forming its identity. Gambling was legal. Opportunity was vast. Benjamin Siegel was placed in charge of development, specifically the Flamingo Hotel. The project was ambitious, too ambitious. Construction delays mounted. Budgets expanded beyond reason. Investors grew anxious. What had been designed as a showcase became a liability. In 1947, Bugsy Siegel was murdered. The killing was public, final. Speculation followed immediately.
Did Lansky authorize it? There is no evidence, only implication. And implication was enough to fuel legend. What is certain is this: the flamingos survived, the system continued, and Lansky's approach remained intact. This moment reinforced a brutal truth. The system mattered more than the individual, and individuals who disrupted it did not remain. During World War II, Lansky's influence reached an unexpected arena: Operation Underworld. The United States government feared sabotage along its ports, German agents, union unrest, dockworker instability. The Navy needed access. Organized crime controlled the docks. Lansky acted as an intermediary, not officially, not public, but effectively. This cooperation remains controversial, but it illustrates a critical reality. When threatened, the state negotiates, even with criminals. After the war, pressure intensified. Congressional hearings, FBI surveillance, public concern. Organized crime became a national issue. Lansky responded by becoming quieter, more insulated, less visible. Then history intervened. The Cuban Revolution. In 1959, Fidel Castro seized power. Casinos were nationalized, foreign operators expelled. Years of investment vanished overnight. Lansky lost millions, perhaps more. For the first time, calculation failed. This loss marked the beginning of decline, not dramatic, not immediate, but irreversible. Back in the United States, authorities intensified their pursuit. Tax investigations multiplied. Surveillance became constant. The margin for error narrowed. Lansky no longer expanded. He defended. His world contracted. The system continued, but the man no longer needed his presence. Systems outlive architect. From this point forward, Meyer Lansky was no longer building power. He was protecting himself from it. Crime had changed. It no longer required vision. It required maintenance. Lansky had succeeded too well. He had helped create a world where crime no longer looked like crime, where violence was optional, where money replaced responsibility. But insulation comes at a cost: distance, isolation, and eventually irrelevance. The system survived, and the man began to fade.
By the early 1960s, it appeared Meyer Lansky had won. He was free. The syndicates still functioned. The government had failed. Again, there were no convictions, no public reckoning, no visible collapse. To many observers, this looked like victory. It was not. It was delay. Power, once stabilized, becomes indifferent to its creator. The systems Lansky helped design no longer needed his presence. They required only maintenance. Money moved where it always had. Decisions were made without him. Disputes were resolved according to rules he no longer controlled. The architecture remained. The architect faded. For decades, federal authorities had tracked Lansky relentlessly. They believed he hid vast wealth overseas, that he controlled gambling profits through complex financial channels, that he was the silent partner behind countless operations. But belief does not equal proof, and proof never arrived. The FBI's files on Lansky grew thicker each year. Surveillance reports, informant tips, financial speculation. Yet every investigation reached the same dead end. No single transaction, no single order, no single witness. The system had been built to prevent exactly that. This was Lansky's greatest success and his greatest liability, because insulation also creates distance, and distance eventually becomes isolation. By the late 1960s, the pressure intensified. Tax authorities closed in, legal costs mounted, old allies disappeared. The margins that once protected him narrowed. In 1970, Meyer Lansky made a final calculation. He fled the United States, not toward triumph,
but toward uncertainty. Israel offered a possibility. Under the law of return, Lansky believed citizenship might shield him from prosecution. It was a gamble, one of the last he would take. The Israeli government reviewed his case carefully, quietly, thoroughly. They denied him permanent residence, not with condemnation, but with refusal. This moment shattered a long-held myth. Power does not travel well, and intelligence, no matter how refined, has limits when confronted with sovereignty. Lansky returned to the United States. He stood trial for tax evasion. Once again, the government failed to convict him. The case collapsed, not because of innocence, but because of absence. Acquittal did not restore power. It ended pursuit and ended relevance. The years that followed were not dramatic. They were diminished. Lansky settled in Miami Beach. He lived quietly. No entourage, no protection, no public authority. The man once suspected of controlling millions struggled financially. Medical bills accumulated. Legal fees drained resources. Friends stopped calling. The syndicate moved on. Crime history often celebrates violent endings, assassinations, prison sentences, public disgrace. Meyer Lansky experienced none of these. His punishment was obscurity. This is the part rarely shown, the slow fading, the silence, the absence of consequence that still feels like consequence. He built a system so efficient that it erased the need for its creator. That is the paradox of intelligence-driven power. When it succeeds completely, it renders the individual disposable. Meyer Lansky died in 1983. The cause was lung cancer. There were no crowds, no headlines worthy of his legend, no reckoning. Only questions. How much money did he really have? No one knows. How much violence did he approve? No one can prove. How much influence did he wield? Enough to reshape organized crime permanently. The myths surrounding Lansky persist because the facts are incomplete, and the facts are incomplete because incompleteness was the design. He did not rule with fear. He ruled with patience. He believed violence was a failure of planning, that noise was a liability, that attention was fatal. His legacy is not found in gunshots or prison records. It is found in method, in the way criminal organizations began to resemble corporations, in the way money became abstract, in the way responsibility dissolved into systems. He replaced chaos with calculation, and calculation changed everything. But calculation also exacts a price: distance, isolation, erasure. Meyer Lansky was not defeated by the law. He was outlived by